Hello, everyone. Welcome to another virtual event with Mysterious Galaxy. I am Nick, the director of events for the store. Today, we are celebrating the latest release of Stephen Spotswood, Secrets Typed in Blood. Hi, Stephen.
Hey. Hello.
And of
Thanks
course,
for having me.
in conversation, the wonderful author, Jane Pek. Hello.
Hey, great to be here.
Thank you, everyone, for being tuning in for this. We really appreciate it. If you notice, if you're watching this live, not in the future, if you're watching live, there's a link below that says Buy Secrets Typed in Blood. That'll take you to the webpage for the event where you can buy any of Stephen's books as well as Jane's. If you do get Stephen's books, we have signed book plates, which we will make sure to get to you. We do ship throughout the country as well as some countries outside the US. And if you have any questions that you want to ask during the event, well, there's also a link below that says ask a question. Go ahead and send those questions there, and about halfway through the event, we'll go ahead and field those questions and answer them. Lastly, don't forget that if you want to get the signed book plates, they're very limited, so make sure to get your order in as soon as possible. So Stephen, thank you very much for being here for the latest book in the Pentecost and Parker series. So excited.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yes, and I love, we were talking about this in the green room, but I love typewriters. In fact, I have my typewriter right here on my arm.
Wow.
That's commitment. Yeah.
It's commitment to the bit. Yeah. I just got it for the book now. All right, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the event. I'll see you all later on in the program.
Great. Yeah, so let's just pretend that we're just having a conversation with no one listening. But I really enjoyed the latest installment. I actually tore through all of your books, and it was just great. I think kind of seeing the characters build and just getting to know them better and seeing the way they investigate and what you do with them. So I guess given that this is the third book, do you want to tell us a bit, without spoilers, to the extent as possible, what that's about, and then maybe a bit about the series as well?
Sure. Let's see if I can wrap it into one statement. So my investigators are the brilliant Lillian Pentecost, who's the smartest woman in New York City, who is living with multiple sclerosis. And her circus-trained right-hand woman, Willow Jean Will Parker. And they are the best pair of investigators working in 1940s New York. Secrets Typed in Blood, in the third novel, they're approached by Holly Quick, who is a pulp mystery writer. She writes pulp mysteries under a variety of pseudonyms, and she's discovered that somebody is taking her fictional murders and recreating them in real life, and she has hired Lillian and Will to figure out who. So it's basically a hard-boiled queer serial killer hunt through 1947 New York City. That's the shortest elevator pitch I think I can do.
That is a great tagline. But I mean, so I have to say, I think that premise of someone who writes crime stories, and I think part of it is that, like you said, she writes under a variety of pseudonyms and she has different styles and all that. Then the idea that then a murderer is then recreating her crimes, and of course it's for some reason that eventually you will come to discover. But I just think that's so great. And I'm wondering, how, I guess on two levels, how you came up with that idea, and then how you thought about the murder, the stories that then led, in which the fictional murders happen, the meta-fictional murders happen, in which then, the fictional real-life murderer kind of then set up.
Yeah. I think I honestly do not remember how, when the original idea popped into my head, but in writing stories that take place in the 1940s, pulp fiction has been, pulp mysteries and pulp magazines have been in my research wheelhouse for a while, and just even the aesthetic alone has been like all over my like Pinterest dramaturgy pages for the series. And so I was reading I have read a lot of really bad 1940s pulp mystery stories, because most of them are not great. But in coming up with the individual murders, I was like, okay, because I wanted kind of to build but I was also like, it's got to be complex, it's got to be weird, it's got to be lurid, and bloody and overly complicated. So yeah, that was sort of the task I set myself. Also, coming with the titles of Holly stories was more fun. Like some of the titles, I'm just like, I love so much. I'm like, I'm giving away this title. I could use this for real, but I'm giving it away to Holly for this like one sentence gag in the middle of one book. Yeah.
No, I agree. I mean, now that you mention it, actually, yeah, it is true that there was some, and you could always reclaim them. I mean,
it's true. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
And write under a pseudonym.
Yeah, and under a pseudonym.
Let's quirk. Yeah. So I know this is the third book, but since I am a relatively recent convert to your books, I'd love to hear you talk a bit about how you came up with the idea originally, like kind of what sparked it, and maybe as you have moved through writing the books in the series, like what has surprised you about it, or like what has changed, how have the characters developed maybe in ways you intended or ways you did not intend?
Yeah. So the original idea came it was the summer of 2018, and I was trying to organize my cabinet of mystery, which is just an old china cabinet stuffed with paperback mysteries that's in our basement. And I was just like going through it because it's just a mess. And I found an old Rex Stout paperback. And Rex Stout wrote the Nero Wolfe series. Are you familiar with Nero Wolfe at all?
So I am, to the extent that I know the premise and like him and Archie Goodwin, and I know he doesn't leave the house. But I must confess that I haven't actually read.
No, it's fine. You're not alone. Like it was immensely popular from like he wrote it from the late 1930s through the 1970s, and he wrote like 60 some novels, probably more than that, and short stories. But it hasn't quite had the staying power of like an Agatha Christie or even like Dashiell Hammett or Raymond Carver, or not Raymond Carver, Chandler. But the premise is you have the genius, just the genius detective who is just an asshole who stays inside all the time and he hates people. But he's the most brilliant detective in New York City, and you have his right hand man, Archie Goodwin, who is the point of view. Like he's the point of view character. And what this series did was that it married like the English mystery, the English murder mystery, get everybody in a drawing room, explain, who did it, with the American hard-boiled voice, and sort of like combine them together. And it was like peanut butter and chocolate, and it was delicious. And that's why he sold so many books over like 5 decades. But I picked it up, and I was like, I remember really liking this. And I read it, and I'm like, I do really like this. And at the time, I only read maybe a quarter of the books he'd written. And I thought, you know what, I'm gonna start at the first book he published, and continue on, like the first one that he published in the 1930s, and like read them all the way through the 1970s. And that was like an 8-month endeavor, punctuated with a lot of other books, but like over there. And somewhere like halfway through, I started thinking, well, if I was ever given this license, like literally the rights to these characters, like what would I do? Like how could I bring them into the 21st century? And I was like, I can't. I don't think they work in the 21st century. But then I just started thinking, well, what would I do with like the paradigm of the brilliant detective who sits and thinks, and then the right hand woman. Like I immediately went like as a playwright, I've written almost entirely for female protagonists. So it's like that's my default.
Yeah.
And then it was just a jump. It was like immediately I was like, oh well, of course, the genius detective would also be a woman. I think immediately post World War II is a fascinating, sometimes underlooked time or overlooked time, and that's why I stuck them there. And yeah, that's sort of like the spark of things. How what surprised me the most, I think, is like how, like I always say, like like you have plot and then you have vibes, and mysteries are usually way more plot than vibes. It's usually like, I don't know, 80-20 plot to vibes. And I expected this to be like 80-20 plot to vibes. And the more it goes, the more like the engine of the story is like, the mystery is the structure to support the scaffolding to support all of the emotion and the inner journey that Will and Lillian. And that surprised me, like how far she had to go, like how much stuff she's dealing with, and then also like the really supportive friendship between Lillian and Will.
Yeah.
I don't know if I saw that coming, or just how much value I put in it now.
Yeah,
that was a lot. That was a long answer.
that was great. I mean, that was all, and I feel like I had heard or read the references to Rex Stout and Nero Wolfe and Archie Goodwin, and so I kind of knew that there was some of that. But I mean that was really interesting how, that the idea that at first you were thinking 21st century, and then kind of pivoting back to an older time period. But I think that's so true what you said about the characters, and I think that was also one of the things that I really loved about reading these books, which is that and like I kind of sometimes think that there are like two kinds of detective stories. There's the one where the detective just doesn't change, like they're just there in order to solve the mystery and be this brilliant person who can just put together all the clues and stun the audience. And then there are like mystery stories where it's as much about the detective as it is about the mystery, and so every mystery is somehow personal to the detective, and it like changes who they are in the course of them solving it. And I really felt like your mysteries were the latter, and it just, I mean, for me as a reader, it made it just so much more like you feel really invested in what's happening to these people, and you kind of like you want them to find out what happened, but you also want to find out what happens to them, kind of thing, as you go.
Yeah.
And it actually made me think, and I saw that Tana French blurbed like your books, and it actually made me think of Tana French's, like her Dublin Murder Squad, I think that's what it's called, because I feel like that's totally what that's like. It's like each mystery is really personal to the detective, and it like kind of leaves them transformed at the end of it.
Yes, and deeply traumatized by the end of it. For all the books. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and so this is kind of diverging, but you mentioned that you were a playwright, and I also saw that in your bio, and I'm just really curious, like which one came first, like the fiction or the playwriting, or do you do both at the same time? And how does your work or as a playwright, or the way you think as a playwright, kind of inform the way you approach your fiction? Confession is that I actually wrote plays a long time ago, and then I realized I was too antisocial to actually like writing plays and working with other people. So then I pivoted to fiction, where I just hide in a cave and write my story.
Yeah, that is legit. I've been a playwright. Like I was a playwright in undergrad. Also did fiction writing in undergrad, but like I stuck with playwriting more. I ended up going to grad school and getting my MFA in playwriting and teaching playwriting. So I've been like a working-ish playwright for 15 years. And then the fiction came in because my wife is a novelist. She's a young adult novelist who's been working for 10 years now. She's had books coming out. So she sort of like, her presence introduced fiction writing and like that whole thing back into my life. And she was the first person to suggest I write a book. which I did, and it was meh. And then I wrote a second one, and it was less meh. But still not the best thing. And then like I had the idea for Pentecost and Parker, which I really should have had. Like, I don't know if I should have had that idea sooner, but I certainly should have gone towards whodunit mysteries sooner, because I've been reading those like since I could read. And with mystery writing, like playwriting, just like playwriting is so plot dependent. Even if it's a character driven play, I always tell my students that you have a very limited amount of theatrical real estate. Like you have a limited amount of space, a limited amount of time, a limited audience attention span. So it's really imperative that if you put something on stage, it means something. You can't have like extraneous stuff. And it's a lot like that with whodunit. It's like everything in there is just sort of like ticking clockwork. And so having to be super spare and economical in playwriting has helped. Like the transferring to fiction, even with mysteries, I'm like, I feel like Superman like come to Earth, and I'm like, I can fly now. I have all this space. I can have an inner monologue. I can have a subplot. Oh, it's so great. But I'm always very aware of like, okay, here's the plot, here's the pacing. Here is the mechanical superstructure that I'm telling the story within.
So your mention of, like writing whodunit mysteries. So I guess, and I know this is funny because I guess I wrote a mystery, but I find it really hard to write mysteries. And I will say that I actually did not set out to write a murder mystery. It was just that like I was like trying to do kind of smaller, more literary mysteries, questions around relationships and stuff like that. But there was no narrative momentum. And so finally I thought, why don't I try killing someone and we'll see what happens. And it worked. But so I kind of stumbled into it. And so I found it very hard. Like I knew who had died, but I didn't know who killed them or what happened and, who the suspects were. And I approached it in the most inefficient manner possible. And so I'm curious, like how you approach, like kind of like constructing that mystery, figuring out who did it, like where you place the clue, like, that kind of stuff, which is like the heart of the classic mystery.
Oof. I wish I could say that I outlined things like really meticulously and I knew everything was that. I don't. What I do is I like write lots of drafts. Like I write a really sloppy first draft and then like so many drafts, and hopefully by the end of all those drafts it looks like I had planned all of it out. But like when I start, I generally know who's dead, and I know who done it. I do not always know the nuances of why they did it, or at least like the emotional heart of why they did it, because sometimes that is a thing that I write, like I discover along the way. So I have like the beginning and the end, and then I have these what I call tentpole moments, which are big, like either action scenes or big emotional scenes. And I generally know what order they're going in, and then in that first draft, I just sort of like blindly fumble through the dark towards like those tentpole moments and then work my way towards the end. And my first drafts are sloppy things. Like usually I'll get to the end and I'm like, okay, what is, there's whole things missing. What's really nice is like I have two really smart detectives. So like if I can dig a really deep hole for them and for myself, and then I'm like, okay, I'm Lillian Pentecost and I'm Will Parker. Like, how do we figure out who did it in a way where it's not super Deus Ex Machina? Like they can literally like figure it out. I think that's probably kind of my method. I dig a hole, I throw myself and my characters in it, and then like we solve the mystery together. And I know who did it, but we have to figure out how to figure out who did it.
Exactly. Yeah.
That is great that the Verifiers was not a murder mystery when you started. That I love that.
I know, it's like someone has to die. And it's interesting. I mean, you say you have a pair of really smart detectives, and I agree. And I mean, from coming from someone who is more used to that Watson Sherlock model or the like Poirot Hastings model, it's interesting to have like the sidekick actually, be complementary as opposed to just the foil to the great detective. Um, and it's also like, I feel like Will is kind of our, I guess, like she's how we see this world. And so we're really in her headspace and we kind of, process things as she processes them. And I guess, like, I mean, what was it like kind of creating this character who is very unique, also, has a lot of baggage, I think. And then, of course, there's the fact that, she spent all that time in the circus, which gives her a very, very useful set of skills when it comes to sleuthing. So, I'm curious how you develop this character and kind of how you see her journey, I guess, through the books.
Yeah, in a lot of ways, she is like she shares elements with a lot of characters that I've written in plays, in that she's dealing with a lot of family trauma. She's coming from a hardscrabble childhood. She's queer, which is doubly, triply problematic in 1940 X. And the circus, I just love circuses and sideshows, and that I was like, oh, this is a great way, so like she can have an entire bag of things that she knows that she can pull out forever. But I think
it's really satisfying to read.
Yeah, good. It's satisfying to write. I also was like, with Holmes and Watson, not Holmes, with Holmes and Watson, like Watson is always talking about Holmes. Like he is just like glued to Holmes's shoulder, and Holmes is out there doing all of these things. And it's always like Watson is sort of this semi-removed, non-omniscient, but just narrate. Like he's just telling us what Holmes is doing. And with the Nero Wolfe series, it's like it's Archie's very much his point of view. And I was like, if I'm gonna spend so much time in someone's head, I want to make her somebody I want to spend a lot of time with. And because I constructed this as an open-ended series that can go on and on. But I also wanted, unlike the Nero Wolfe stories, to have these characters grow and change. I had to have her have things that she is dealing with, like a lot of things that she is dealing with, and the kind of things that you don't just solve and then it's done, we're good. We have solved all of our family baggage. We have solved all of our, this trauma and that trauma, and the constant PTSD of being a detective and getting shot at and knocked unconscious. That's so many concussions that so many of these characters go through.
I will say she gets roughed up. I mean, the first and second books, the third one, I'm trying to remember, maybe not that much.
Not as much.
I'm not giving too much away. And so I guess, so we have Will, and because she's our narrator, we are right in her head. And then we have Lillian, who is kind of close to everyone, including Will. And one of the things that I really enjoyed reading your books was also seeing Will discover things about Lillian as the books progress. And I mean, I feel like you do this kind of teaser thing a bit where, I mean, at least in this book, there is this whole part where Lillian talks about herself, but then we as the reader don't get to see it because, it's just kind of censored from us, which then of course makes us doubly curious as to what all that is. And so I guess, similarly, when you think of is she kind of perfectly clear to you as a character, and you're just kind of pacing, what you reveal about her, or is she a bit of a mystery as well, even to you? And how, I guess, why did you choose to kind of reveal this character to us in this way?
I think I think she was a mystery. Like maybe when I was first writing Fortune Favors the Dead, I had like very broad notions of where she came from. That has gotten refined a lot. Like I would say like 70% of her biography in my head. Like I know the big strokes. I know a lot of the pivot moments in her life. And I don't know, I just like pacing it out because I feel like she is such a private person.
Yeah.
Even from Will. It's interesting. It's like she is also like very emotionally honest, and willing to connect with someone who could have just been her employee.
Yeah.
But at the same time, like all of her biography is like kept in a little box in her heart. Which I will say, it's not gonna be like, crumbs forever. Like I have like in very short order in future books, like we're gonna learn, basically a good part of her origin story.
Oh, that is awesome.
Yeah.
And I'm sure everyone is like super excited to hear that. So then that like raises all these other questions I want to ask. But I think one thing that I did want to touch on with Lillian was just, I mean, you chose to make her a detective with a disability, multiple sclerosis. And, what was your thinking around that? And, how has that been kind of portraying a protagonist with that illness and, how she functions and how the illness progresses? And that is alluded to in the books as well.
Yeah. I think part of the inspiration has been, one of my longest held day job has been as a health journalist, writing about federal healthcare. Like my main beat is Veterans Affairs, which is why so much of these books are about PTSD. But I've also like written extensively about chronic illnesses and the people who treat them and the people who have to live with them, and recognizing that is like that is very underrepresented in fiction. Like people who have these kinds of chronic illnesses and not have it their entire like the entire character be about that illness. And so I think that is like that was like the sort of the genesis. As for why choosing MS specifically, it was a lot of it was practical. A lot of it was because it was called MS. It was called multiple sclerosis. They knew the name for it. It was being treated not well. Like they had treatments, and then also it's a wide variety of symptoms that can come and go and progress at a mysterious and unknown rate. So it gives me leeway in how deeply it's affecting Lillian from book to book. But at the same time, it is also like it plot-wise and narrative-wise, it puts this ticking clock there. For Lillian, it's like she wants to do all the things she wants to get done. Like there is a clock there. And for Will, it's she has to become good enough to take over the mantle. Yeah. So as part, for altruistic reasons, in part for just writer mercenariness of like having this thing there that really just ups the tension and the stake. Yeah.
No, definitely. And it's interesting because I feel like, when I picked up the first book, it's clearly Will looking back on her adventures with Lillian. And so in that sense, you already, have that feeling that like there is an after, and then these books are kind of the before. And I mean, was that kind of in your mind? Like what made you kind of decide to have it be like a retrospective approach?
Well, I think part of it is because it gives me it allows me to write this like with a very, very specific voice. Like, it's not just Will's point of view. It's like her slang. Like, she gets, and like, it allows her to have, and me to have fun with getting a little meta with these. And like, she knows she's writing what's essentially a mystery novel, and she's also a big fan of pulp mysteries and mystery novels and like noir movies. So which just adds this layer there, and it also allows me at any point during any of these books to drop one of those, like, Will breaking the fourth wall of, like, you know, I am in the future and I know that this does not turn out well, like this.
Yes.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
No, it definitely, I mean, you definitely employ it to, you know, to like very nice effect, I think, throughout the series. So I guess, and so you had mentioned, you know, that like in future books we would learn more about Lillian. So how far do you plan, or like, you know, how much of an idea do you have? How many books ahead?
So by the time I was done book one, like writing it, I had it plotted through book 6. And by plotted, I mean, like, I know pretty much what happens through book 6.
So you said 6, like 6 books?
6 books. Yeah.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah. And then I have like, but that's not like all I have. That is a sort of, it's a nicely self-contained arc of sorts. But I also have like standalone ideas for, probably have like another half dozen, like, what ifs, like stories that are somewhere in my notes. But yeah, plotted through book 6 with plenty more that are like looser ideas, but not tightly plotted.
That's amazing. I feel like I can barely get through one book. I mean, and I feel like kind of knowing that far out in advance also allows you to do really fun things with the interim books.
Yeah, it's really nice that I get to that I know what characters will come in handy. Like, I can introduce characters in, like, I introduced a lot of characters, like circus characters in book 2 that I am like, that person's coming back and that person's coming back and that person's coming back. Like, because they're just too much fun to just let lay there. But yeah, it can be like, oh, this person in 3 years, they'll come back in book 5.
Which is really cool. Yeah. And I feel like I mean, as a reader, I also really enjoy that when someone pops up and you're like, oh yes, this person's back.
Good. Yay.
And I think similarly, I mean, you kind of have, like, each book has its own mystery and its own villain, its own antagonist, maybe is a better word. But you also do have kind of an overarching, you know, when I read it, I kind of thought of the Moriarty type of setup. And, you know, and again, I guess, is this something that you kind of had in your head the whole while? And, you know, what made you think about having this overarching framework of villainy combined with the individual, like, mysteries?
Oh man, where did that come from? I mean, obviously Moriarty was a big influence to have someone there. I think in like the original draft of Fortune Favors the Dead, I think it might have snuck up on me. I think it might have been one of those things where, like, I had these loose threads and it could be explained if there was someone pulling the strings. And then I'm like, oh. But I don't remember. But now I have this wonderful character that a friend of mine who's a gaming fan described as chaotic neutral Moriarty, in that she's not necessarily good or evil. She's not necessarily like entirely lawless, but like 85% of the time, she and Lillian Pentecost are like the Venn diagram is real deep between them, but it's at like 15% where she will murder whoever gets in her way. Yeah.
Yeah, no, and I really love kind of how you expanded on, I mean, again, no spoilers, but how you expanded on that towards the end of the third book. And I feel like it kind of, like gave us a sense of maybe what might be coming, and just this idea, like it seemed like things were going to evolve, and there was going to be more fun stuff down the line.
Yes. I have that's big plans in the near future. You don't have to wait terribly long.
That's awesome. Okay, so I actually have a ton more questions I wanted to ask, but that we also do have questions, and we are at that 30-minute mark now. So
Okay.
So go ahead and ask all these wonderful questions that people have submitted. So this is Kels, I guess they asked, how do you go about writing your books? Do you start with a solution or think of an interesting problem and solve it as you go?
I'm trying to think about like how I have gone about this. I think I start with the interesting problem first, because I know with Secrets Typed in Blood, I definitely had the what if somebody was recreating pulp mystery murders in real life. And I definitely did not have the solution to that first. And actually, I think it's the same thing that happened with Murder Under Her Skin, where I'm like, someone has killed the tattooed woman. But when I started, like drafting, I did not necessarily know who. So yeah, it's the solution comes very quickly though, because that's sort of like the thing that I'm writing towards, and if I don't know what I'm writing towards, it gets real rambly. But the fun stuff is like the emotional journey that gets us there. Like, it is fun to like create a mystery, but like it has become more fun for me to discover how the events of the mystery like impact Will and Lily and their life and their relationship.
Yeah, and I feel like you do both really well, in the sense that it almost feels like it's almost like a virtuous cycle in a way, I guess I would say, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, and then we have so Tina asks, I'm curious what sparked the rebrand for the covers. Both sets of artwork are beautiful, so what triggered the change?
What triggered the change was we did, so one of the fun things about starting on a new continuing series for a publisher is that when you start, you have no idea who's going to be reading it. You have a general idea of who it might appeal to, but like it might surprise you who is picking it up, like what kind of people, like and then what covers and art like they respond to. So like after the hardcover of Murder Under Her Skin, we did Doubleday did like a whole brainstorming rebranding. And I think the idea generally was like they wanted something that screamed mystery. And the artwork for the first two is a South American artist named Marie Ricardo, and he is great. I love them. They're great. And they don't necessarily scream mystery. Necessarily. At least like not popping out from the bookshelves kind of screaming mystery. And I think that's kind of what they were going for. They want like big, bright, bold. If you see it, you're like, yes, that somebody dies in that. You find out who.
That's a bloody typewriter. So
yeah. But I am the same. I love both sets, both types of artwork, and also like now having some foreign editions with even a wider variety of cover art is really lovely to see like what works in different countries. And what styles like different foreign publishers think appeal. I get a little wonky, but yeah.
Yeah, so you mentioned that when you first started series, you never know like who might pick it up. I mean, so were there in fact any surprises like that you found along the way? Like,
I have. What are the surprises? I don't know if it's a surprise, but it's a delight. The number of younger, generally queer women who message me, usually on Instagram, saying that either they, usually like that they had not been into mysteries, like it wasn't like a genre that they felt compelled to read, because the vast majority of protagonists in mysteries look like me. You know, they're middle-aged white guys, and that having like a young bisexual woman like leading the book, they really enjoyed being seen, or like having someone that they do not have to do like the heavy lifting of inserting themselves into the story.
Yeah.
Like, they're already there, and like that's really that never gets old. I will always take messages like that.
Yeah, I mean, you know, as someone who's gay, like I definitely appreciated that representation, and I love the fact that, you know, Will was that protagonist and she was comfortable with her sexuality. Must admit, I was kind of rooting for, you know, the romance in book one to go somewhere, but unfortunately, it did not. Maybe you can bring her back since you have 6 books to like work with.
No spoilers, but you're not the only person who said that. Like a lot of people have said that.
Because you know.
And I've been like, do you know how much extra trauma Will would be carrying around if like they had really hooked up hardcore before the end of the but yeah, but she could very well make an appearance.
Yeah. Okay, so then another one from Kels, which is, so how does writing mysteries compare to the other forms of media that you've written for?
So the big forms, it's like mysteries and then journalism and playwriting. And like the thing that unites them all is like they all need to be concise. Like they all need to like especially journalism, especially it's like you take the disparate elements and you like have to create a thread that somebody can follow. The way they differ though, the first few drafts of Fortune Favors the Dead, so playwriting is an immensely collaborative art form. It's, you know, even once you have like the script done, like you're going into a rehearsal room where you're working with directors, actors, designers, choreographers. Like the art is not done until it's on the stage. And when you go and write a book, that you don't have a costumer, you don't have a choreographer, you don't have actors. You have to decide what these people look like. You have to decide what their hands are doing all the time. You have to decide what they're wearing. I know so much about women's fashion in the 1940s now, and I'm so happy that so many people have like scanned old catalogs and put them online. Like that has been wonderful. But all of the little things that I took for granted that were like being done by other artists as a playwright, I am now like, nope, I gotta create the entire world. But at the same time, I have an entire world to create. Like I do have an inner monologue. I can have a car chase in New York City, and not have it look dumb, which it would do on stage. But yeah, that was like kind of the heavy lifting of the first book. And to be honest, it's like the thing of like having to decide where everyone is at every given moment. I'm like, it's like this person hasn't moved in 2 pages. What the hell are they doing? I can't just have them arch their eyebrow all the time, come up with a different facial expression.
It's instead of just letting the actor handle that, right?
Yeah,
like,
exactly. I'm like,
what to do with their face.
Yeah, I can't just cast this and just sit back and no.
Yeah, and that's so funny. I mean, that you mentioned fashion because, like, I mean, so I'm someone who doesn't really pay attention to what people are wearing, and I just wear the same 2 things all the time. But so, you know, I really appreciated actually how Will noticed what everyone was wearing all the time, including herself. And And I feel like, I mean, now that you've, talked about being a playwright, like that makes sense now that, you're thinking about how it looks visually and the colors and, everything. Yeah, I mean, I guess when I read it, I was curious as to whether or not you intended for that to somehow be some aspect of her identity.
Did I intend it? No. Is it? Yes. She is a clothes horse. Like
Yeah.
Will Parker is a clothes horse, and I'm like, no, it makes sense. She grew up poor, and having to travel, like she left home with like maybe not even a suitcase. She had to for years she was with a traveling circus where she had access to all these costumes that she did not own, and probably owned like 2 sets of clothes herself. I'm like, of course, with disposable income, Will Parker is going to be at like Macy's every weekend, and she'll know all the seasons of fashion. But of course, that means that I need to know.
Yeah.
It's fun.
Yeah, I mean, there's this really fun scene early on, right, where she's talking about how she went to Bloomingdale's and got talked into buying, like an outfit, and then Lillian comments on it. And I mean, tangentially, that's also like, I think part of why I enjoyed the series so much is also the humor of it. I mean, it's just, and the dialogue is really snappy, which again makes sense because you're a playwright. But there's also just this humor and just like wit to it, I think, which, just makes for a really fun read.
Okay.
Okay, so we have a couple more questions. So this one is, so what research and sensitivity experiences did you go through in creating such a wonderfully vivid character who's dealing with multiple sclerosis? And can you also talk about your work to raise funds and promote awareness about MS?
Let's see. I did not have an MS specific sensitivity reader, but just like almost 20 years of writing about like the healthcare field and people living with and dealing with chronic illnesses, and yeah, I think it's like I think I'm doing it well. I hope I'm doing it well. I've gotten some really nice emails from people with MS who have responded really well to the book and really appreciate that Lillian is somebody who does her job really well, despite having MS. As for raising funds, I March is National MS Awareness Month, and last March, I set up a site through the National MS Foundation, National and National MS Society, to basically, it was like, if you donate X, I will send you a signed copy of one of the US or the UK version of Fortune Favors the Dead. And I'm almost certainly going to do that again this year, just because it's a really easy way to like raise funds for research and treatment. Yeah, I'll probably be like brainstorming. I might just do this. I might do it year round. I know I like push it in March, but it's something that I might try. It's a little, yeah. I don't know. Sorry, wasn't expecting that. Now it's got me thinking and like post-holiday season things to do.
Yes, add it to the 2023 list.
And somebody put the link for the National MS Society.org. There.
Oh, awesome.
Right there.
That is great. Okay, and so another question is, so what inspired you to delve into mystery writing? Was it a specific piece of media, like a movie or a TV show, or something else?
I've been reading mysteries since I could read. Like I think about like the first books I read, it was Hardy Boys, it was Nancy Drew, and then like immediately into Sherlock Holmes and Agatha Christie. So I've been reading mysteries forever, and like I wrote I wrote an essay about recently for Crime Reads about sort of my personal fascination with fictional murder and real life murder and true crime. And thinking about fictional murder and mysteries, like I think the appeal of mysteries and why I would eventually start, like why I'm eventually would start writing them, is that it presents a world where a terrible thing has happened, like somebody has died, but you know that by the end of the book, everything is going to be as right as it possibly can be, in a world where somebody is dead. Like that if you were smart and you're diligent and you're lucky and you're quick, you can figure things out and succeed. That you can figure out who done it, you can solve the mystery, and everything will turn out all right. And I think for a lot of people whose maybe grew up in childhoods where that was not necessarily a given, it's a very comforting thing, and it's like why many people gravitate towards it. Yeah, so like mysteries have just been always there. It wasn't a specific thing. It's just it's my comfort food. Yeah.
So that's interesting what you said about, like I guess that what's comforting about mysteries is that I guess it kind of rights whatever wrong has been created in society. And it's interesting because I feel like in your books, and I would say maybe not so much the second one, but in the first one, the person who actually committed the crime, like that doesn't necessarily and similar, I think in the third one too, that like I feel like it's interesting that we see what these individuals sense of what is right and what is justice, like what that is, and that is not necessarily the same as the letter of the law.
Yeah, and it's also like that's kind of my intent. I mean, by presenting, Will and Lillian are going to change over time, and in some ways that change is not always going to be good. I mean, MS is progressive, but I didn't really want, and also just thinking about the age that I said it in, like the post World War II, going into the 50s, like the Lavender Scare, like hasn't been named, but it's started. Like McCarthy is like right over the hill. There's a lot of really shitty things that are going to happen, and I didn't want necessarily to tell stories where everything is like wrapped up neatly at the end. Like there are always like these little raw threads, emotionally or plot wise, that will lead into the other book, but just sort of give a sense that like time is progressing, the world is changing, like somebody or multiple somebodies have died and we cannot rewind that. Bad things have happened to our characters in these books, and they're going to leave scars. That's another thing I've done is I have a list of all of Will's scars, like and all the injuries because having a character who gets knocked unconscious every book or every other episode of a show, it's like, oh, they are going to have a traumatic brain injury. Cannot do that. And like it's like literally just like the scars build up. Like these are I don't know where I started with that, but that's where I got.
Yeah, no, I mean, and you definitely do see, like, I mean, she does have a violent streak, and I think that comes out from the first book, and she thinks about that, I think, in the second book, and maybe into the third book. The third book actually feels to me maybe relatively more like uplifting, maybe just I mean, because of how it ends up until that last epilogue, which then segues into the next book. But yeah, I mean, I think it's great that there is this character with this. I mean, there is some moral ambiguity there, and I think like she has thought to herself like that she does have a lot of anger and she has to work through things. So your mention of setting, like when you set the book, I kind of feel like like oftentimes writers who set books in the past, like kind of how they portray that period is also influenced by their present. And I'm curious, do you feel like has any of what our present is like, how that has influenced the way that you have portrayed the world of the 40s that Pentecost and Parker are in?
Oh yeah, certainly. And also just knowing in hindsight, like the way history is written, and knowing that there are whole worlds and untold stories that didn't make it into the history books. And I don't know, like when we think of the end of World War II, all the soldiers come home, they get married, they have kids, they build the suburbs. It's like the creation of the white picket fence and 2.5 kid American dream. And that there is this, like, we kind of skip over like 1945 through, like, we skip over the Lavender Scare, we skip over McCarthyism, we skip over like all of the neighborhoods that were literally paved under to build the suburbs, to build the highways, whole communities that were beaten into submission. And it just feels like a lot of the things that happened then, like, we've never looked at, we've never investigated. We skip them in history books, and we're still dealing with the issues of what happened there. It's like we built the golden age of America, or what we call or think of as the golden age of America, on the like decimated neighborhoods and bodies of a lot of people who didn't make it into history books. And now we're still dealing with the same issues, and we're like, where did this come from? It's like, it's always been there. It's been there since the 1950s. It's been there since the 1860s. It's just there. So I absolutely am bringing a 21st century point of view to, like, digging into these things as much as I can in a whodunit murder mystery, because it's not like there are other writers doing much better, more like nuanced nonfiction work into doing that. Yeah. Again, I went rambling. What did that answer the question? I don't even remember. Like, how you phrased that.
No, I think that was a great answer. And like, I think I can definitely see that. And I will say, also reading it, like, it feels like there is a very feminist sensibility to the books, actually, which I do also really appreciate. Yeah.
Are we at time? We are at time.
Yes. Unfortunately, we are at time. But lastly, before we go, I just want to make sure, where can people find you both so they can follow any news and what you're doing, or what other things you might be working on?
Okay. My website is stephenspotswood.com, which I try and keep updated and usually fail miserably at. And I am Playwright Steve on Instagram and TikTok, and, at least for now, Twitter.
We'll see how that is next week or something. Yeah. What about you, Jane?
So I've actually never been on Twitter, so I guess I'm, a bit away from whatever is imploding.
You're ahead of the game now.
But I am on Instagram at Jane Pek Writes, and I have a website, janepek.com, which is very not updated.
Yeah.
But New Year's resolution. Yeah.
Stephen, Jane, thank you so much for doing this. And everyone out there who are tuning in, thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Yeah, this was great. Thank you.
Don't forget, everyone, get your copy of Secrets Typed in Blood while you can. We still have some book plates available, and I hope everyone has a good night. See you next time. Bye.
Great. Thanks. Have a good night.